All right. The correlates with happiness. What factors correlate with happiness? So here we have happy. All right. So a lot of these are going to be, survey kinds of sources. So, for example, high self-esteem. We're going to assess self-esteem using, the Rosenberg self-esteem scale or something like that. And higher scores on a self-esteem scale are associated with higher scores on measures of happiness, particularly within individualistic societies. Those societies where self-esteem is emphasized and self-esteem is something that people strive for, we see this positive correlation between high self-esteem and increased happiness. Optimism and basic trust. So we have scales for these things too. The optimism scale, there's a life orientations test that you can use to measure optimism. There are trust scales that you can, there's a scale for everything, right? Higher optimism, higher basic trust are associated with happiness. So there's sort of this implication that people who look out into the world and see a high probability of good outcomes or a high probability that the world is trustworthy tend to also self-report happiness, right? Score higher on a happiness scale. From the big 5 traits, the 3 that correlate with happiness in a positive way are extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. So extroversion, you might call this outgoingness, liking to do, sort of social activities where there's going to be a lot of people, or liking to listen to loud music, or enjoying sort of exciting sports. These kinds of things are all part of extroversion. Agreeableness is sort of being soft-hearted and trusting. Oh, wow, look, that probably correlates well with a score on basic trust, doesn't it? So with agreeableness, it's sort of being influenceable by the people around us. That's a good way to think about agreeableness. It's not just that the other person necessarily asks us to go along with something, but it also could be that we want to please other people. Conscientiousness refers to our tendency to be reliable and predictable and to do things like be on time and, complete work that we promise to do and, those kinds of things. So conscientiousness is associated with happiness. Having an internal locus of control. So this concept refers to believing that our hard work will lead to the outcomes that we want. We kind of talked about this a little bit before under the context of like resilience and grit, having a growth mindset, those kinds of things fall under this concept of locus of control. A person who has an internal locus of control believes that they're in charge of their outcomes. A person with an external locus of control believes that fate or luck or God or something outside of their own control is what determines their outcomes. And so people who believe that they are in charge of their own outcomes tend to be happier. Those who take personal responsibility for things, again, this kind of goes along with, believing that, my hard work will get me where I want to go. Well, I'm personally responsible for my own outcomes, right? So those kind of go together. Conscientiousness goes together with personal responsibility, right? So a lot of these things kind of overlap and correlate with each other. Probably some of them are a little bit redundant with each other. Having close friendships or a satisfying marriage, either one of those things is associated with greater happiness. A lot of people think, more friends, more happy, and that's not necessarily the case. Having at least one close friend and or one close romantic partner is associated with greater happiness. Having work or leisure activities that engage your skills. So if you have maybe a very redundant work job type of thing that you do, let's say you work at a factory and your factory job involves, basically screwing these 4 nuts on each chassis as it goes by. You might say, that doesn't seem to be engaging my skills that well. But let's say, I don't know, I'm just making up imaginary people. So I come home from my factory job and now I'm writing the great American novel on my free time. And it may or may not ever get published, but I really enjoy doing it because it really engages my creativity and my writing and like that. It doesn't have to be your paid work. that engages your skills. It can be hobbies as well. And, vice versa. You may have a job that just completely engages all of your skills. And then having a meaningful religious faith. I've gotten pushback from students on this last one in particular, that's like, how do you know that? There's been a lot of research on that particular question. The idea that religiosity is what we call it when a person has, the degree to which a person has a religious faith that they meaningfully engage in. And people are on a spectrum on it. Some people are like affiliated with a religion, but don't really practice it, all the way up to people who are, like really, really into it. And I'm not talking about ministers and stuff. I'm talking about within like the parishioners or the congregation or whatever. And so within that group, you have this whole spectrum of people who maybe show up on the high holidays and all the way up to people who are there, maybe multiple times a week and are really super engaged in their house of worship and whatever they're doing. So it's not necessarily about the amount of time you're there or whatever. It's the degree to which the faith is meaningful to the person and having an effect on that person's decision-making and interpretations of things. I mean, one of the big things in positive psychology is that we're striving to figure out our purpose in life. And so for people with a meaningful religious faith, a lot of times they fall back on that interpretation of what life is about. And that makes it one less step of struggle if they already firmly believe that this is the meaning in life, that is the thing that is taught in my religious teachings, right? So this is what we're talking about with happiness, right? That if you have, if you now through the lens of that, look through all of these things that are correlated with happiness, you see that basically those things that make it more likely that you will engage in the quest for finding meaning and the quest for finding a purpose are associated with happiness. And so if I had to put one big fat label across this slide, I would say, knowing your purpose is the best predictor of happiness. But there's like all these different little elements that help to contribute to us finding our purpose. And by the way, if you're like, I don't know what my purpose is, most people really honestly don't have like a firm, I know what my purpose is, but that's what we're striving for in as humans, according to positive psychology. All right, so what things are not correlated with happiness? So again, if we've been studying what goes with happiness, it's not surprising that we have stumbled upon some things that are clearly not correlated with happiness. Age. A lot of times when we're younger, we think, well, this is probably like the happiest time of my life and life's only going to get like less happy. It turns out that's not true. Last chapter, I showed you that life, across the life ratings of life satisfaction. And you see that across the entire lifespan, people tend to be very stable in the degree of life satisfaction that they're experiencing. A lot of people use life satisfaction as a stand-in for happiness in their research, right? So life satisfaction being very stable across the lifespan, we shouldn't be surprised that happiness is very stable across the lifespan. Sex or gender is not associated with happiness. Sometimes people might have a complaint or a brag about being this or that, about being whichever sex or gender they are, whatever. But in general, people's happiness is not related to their gender or their sex. Education level does not predict happiness. If you're thinking, well, once I complete my degree, I'm going to be happy. Or once I complete my graduate degree, then I'll be happy. No. It's not, it doesn't work like that. You might be boosted for a moment following graduation. Yay, I accomplished my goal. I have gotten what I wanted to get and I've done what I wanted to do. That's going to make you happy, but not permanently. Like it's not going to make you a happier person. Parenthood does not make you happy. Yes, the birth of your child, you might be like, oh, I'm so ecstatic. Everybody's healthy and happy and everything worked out well and yay. But, parenting has ups and downs and everything else, and people's level of happiness is pretty stable. And so adding something like a child does not make you happy. Being physically attractive does not make you happy. The halo effect tells us that attractive people probably are happier. We all look at attractive people and think, man, they've got it made. Look, they're fit. Their hair is glossy, whatever, their skin is clear. whatever it is, we look at and think they have it made. But the truth is, every physically attractive person has self-doubts and things like that as well. So being physically attractive is not the cure-all to make a person happy. And then income, like I've been saying, as long as you're above, a study came out by Kahneman and Tversky in like 2007, I think it was, where they said, 75,000 and above, there's no difference in the happiness. I have been telling you poverty level is the cutoff between where increasing income is associated with more happiness. And I think I'm right. I think Kahneman and Tversky kind of randomly picked a number. And I mean, as inflation occurs, that number has to be changing, and it hasn't been adjusted. Nobody has reported a new number of baseline happiness changing. So I'm going to stick with, as long as you have enough to meet the basic needs. Once you get above that, happiness does not commensurately increase with income. It stays stable. All right. How about some variations in happiness? All right. I want you to consider these thought questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy will you be in a year from now if today, right now, right after you take this scale, you won a $10 million lottery? So as soon as you get done with this scale, you win $10 million in the lottery. How happy are you going to be in a year from now on a scale from 1 to 10? And obviously, I mean the standard scale from 1 to 10. So 10 means like ecstatic, right? The best happiness. And 1 is like moping around all day. So how happy would you be if you won a $10 million lottery? Okay, how happy would you be a year from now if today you suffered a crippling car accident that left you a paraplegic, which means that you're paralyzed from the legs down? How happy would you be a year from now if, I mean, it sounds fine to say right after you completed this survey, you won $10 million. It sounds terrible to say right after you complete the survey, you suffer a crippling car accident and now you are paralyzed. But imagine that and see, how happy would you be a year from now? Most people think that they'll be pretty happy after having won 10 million. And most people predict that they would be pretty unhappy next year if they've spent the past year, trying to recover from a crippling accident that left them a paraplegic. I'm going to stop talking and let you watch this TED Talk called Stumbling on Happiness. And let's see what you learn from this expert on happiness about the impact of these positive and negative outcomes. All right, I'll see you on the other side.